I'm Jackson Nguyen. I am an unscripted executive producer, mainly in sports television and documentary.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over.
When you were growing up, did you have any sports dreams? Did you participate in a lot of sports activities?
I started playing football at 8 years old. So I was fortunate enough to get introduced to the sport of football at a young age. My older brother played, and that kind of defined me at a very early age, all the way through high school and even a little bit into college. So football was probably the main sport that I played. I played baseball a little bit, basketball, but back in my day, you weren't allowed to do too many dual sports, and you couldn't do more than one sport at the high school that I was at. So football was kind of my backbone growing up.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. I went to a high school in the northwest corner of Los Angeles called Chatsworth High School. Go Chancers.
There's not a lot of Asian kids growing up in that neighborhood, right?
There were, but there weren't a lot of Asian athletes. I was probably one of maybe two or three Asian football players on my team. I had a handful of Asian friends, but most of them probably gave up sports by the time they got into high school.
What do you think that is? Why do you think Asian kids didn't play a lot of sports in our time growing up?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kenneth. For me, just looking at it from my point of view, a Vietnamese American, anybody who is Vietnamese American growing up in my generation, their parents kind of weren't really into sports. My family, I kind of went through a divorce with my family. And so my mom was more Americanized and just kind of wanted to get as much help as she could raising the kids, the two boys. And so football was a great kind of like place to drop us off and get coaching and get good adult supervision. My other friends, I'm not gonna lie, and it pains me to kind of talk about it a little bit, but some of them got into gang banging. I think it has a lot to do with kind of like that big wave of Southeast Asian Americans coming after the war, including a lot of Vietnamese people that just looked for a place to belong. And I had family and friends that kind of went that route, where I was fortunate enough to play sports. And if anything, my family and friends encouraged me to kind of stay out of the street life. So I stayed with sports, whereas a lot of Asian Americans in the 90s at that time to fit in kind of got involved into the street life. There were kids that were smart and got into academics and things like that. Kind of the stereotypical what was it?
Model minority.
Model minority, right? Exactly. But it was a cool thing, I think, for a lot of us in the 90s to kind of get with these Asian street gangs, Asian streetcar gangs, big thing, and it's something that I actually want to take a closer look at. And one of the shows that I worked on several years ago kind of dived into that a little bit when I kind of documented the murder of Dr. Hong Nor, from the amazing actor who won the Oscar in The Killing Fields. He was murdered by a street gang, Cambodian street gang of all things. And so I learned a lot from the people that I interviewed there, law enforcement, former gangsters, and, for not getting really too into it, it felt, for me, at least growing up in that era, a place to fit in, and so for me, sports was my outlet. And fortunately for me, I got to kind of like escape a little bit of that street life through sports.
Yeah, what a blessing. And not only did you get to escape that street life, but you got to have opportunities later down the road that opened up this big sports world. Because, let's face it, there's not a whole lot of Vietnamese people in sports. In professional sports, behind the camera, in front of the camera, it's just not a thing. And to see this happening more often now is such a beautiful thing.
It is. It is. I mean, I remember, having dreams of wanting to play football in college and in the pros. And there was a Vietnamese American named Dat Nguyen, who played for the Cowboys and the Texas A&M Aggies. And I could have swore that would have been me if I was fortunate enough to get as big as he did. But he was, I mean, the one of this day, probably the one Vietnamese guy that made it all the way to the pros and did a great job. I think he's still in the league. Yeah, the one guy. Yeah, but he was a great inspiration. And just seeing people like him, obviously Yao Ming and other Asian Americans do great in sports is great inspiration. But behind the scenes, there wasn't many of us, still isn't that many of us. Every once in a while you hear a name or you see a name, but we don't connect enough. It's a small fraternity of Asian American, male and female. I mean, mainly male. I see some females here and there, but not that many Asian American males kind of in my industry on the unscripted sports, and even on the unscripted TV side.
But, I think there's obviously a cultural thing going on. We're, supposedly into academics and, getting the grades and everything. But there's another side to all this too, is just the physical stature of going into a pro sports like the NFL, football. You have to be a big boy. You have to be a big son of a gun to get into that. And then not only do you have to be big, but you have to be super fast and super twitchy and the whole, the whole package, right? In order to compete at that level.
Yeah, and it starts young, and in a lot of ways it's generational, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 5'9" at best, and I made it as far as I did just because I was borderline crazy and threw my body into things that I probably shouldn't have and people that I shouldn't have. But yeah, I mean, it has a lot to do with it. I mean, at my best, I would probably ran a 4.9, a 4.8, which couldn't get you, sniffed at in collegiate sports. And so, no, I mean, I don't know what that is. I mean, I think that's, generational, takes time. I'm trying to think, there's amazing athletes like Taylor Rapp, who's in the NFL right now. But a lot of them are half breeds.
That's controversial too, right?
Yeah, well, we can't say that, right? I mean, God bless him. God bless him. God bless Kyler Murray. God bless all these amazing athletes. It's like my friend used to tell me, the great Ken Wu, who's a cameraman. He's like, I can't be half Asian, even though he was half Asian, right? He's like, it's like saying you're half pregnant.
It's so true. And but what is it? The Christian Juzhang over at UCLA.
Juzhang,
yeah, those boys,
Johnny and Christian Juzhang. I think one of them playing in Vietnam.
Yep.
The other one's trying to still make it into the league.
Yeah. Again, half. Those guys are half Vietnamese.
Hey, I'll take it. My kids are half. So to me and to anyone that's going to be seeing them, if they ever make it in anywhere in life, they'll be Vietnamese.
It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing when, genetically we're a little bit shorter. We're not as, gifted with the big muscles, and it's difficult. Well, I think in sports like MMA, we find a lot more Vietnamese. That's where a big concentration of Vietnamese, because, it's divided by weight class. So I think there's a fair entry point for, Vietnamase people.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's hard work, right? I mean, regardless of how big or small you are, or too fast you are. I mean, I've been privileged enough to hang out with some of the best athletes on the planet. And then you get the privilege of filming with Manny Pacquiao, and he defied all odds. How did he separate himself from, the rest of the Philippines, the rest of Southeast Asia, the rest of Asia? And I got to see it firsthand.
I wanted to ask you that. So you're around a lot of these elite athletes. What do you think separates the Kobes and the Pacquiaos from other people?
I've learned that they're a little manic. They're a little manic. They're off. They're not like the rest of us. You can't, in my experience, they're not your run-of-the-mill person you could go and have a cup of coffee with. They're geared a different way.
In what way?
Well, Mayweather used to famously say, when I'm working, y'all sleeping, or when y'all sleeping, I'm working. And he wasn't lying, like, he was nocturnal in a lot of ways, and he would run at 1, 2, 3 in the morning for 8 miles. A lot of people, especially in boxing, they wake up early, and train early in the morning, and they do some hard work. And not to take anything away from that, but Mayweather was geared differently, where he was like, hey, I fight at like 9 p.m. Why am I waking up at 4 a.m. to train? And he would just train into the night, and he wouldn't drink, he wouldn't smoke. It looked like he partied, but he really wasn't partying. It was almost like an image he put out to the
To
world,
trick them.
just to trick them in some ways. But he was working hard. He was training. I mean, you're talking about he's a couple years older than me. So when I was documenting him in his late 20s and throughout his 30s, while he was older than some other people, he was working harder than them, doing 16-minute rounds, back-to-back sparring sessions, and just, you never saw anybody work harder. Pacquiao was very similar. Joe Calzaghe, championship boxer from Wales, same thing. Jimmy Johnson, who I got to document in NASCAR, same thing. Ronda Rousey. A lot of these athletes just were working while everyone else was sleeping. I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's that simple, but it's that you got to start with the hard work and follow it up without compromising. Like your family is going to take a hit. Your friends are going to take a hit. The fun that you think you're going to have when you become a champion is definitely going to be put to the side. Again, Mayweather had been a champion ever since he was 20. How does someone stay a champion from 20 to borderline 50 years old now?
Yeah.
The entire time, stay undefeated. It's hard work. It is hard work.
Does that affect the way you raise your children? Because now you understand what it takes, and do you push them a certain way, or do you understand that is a specific type of human being, and you kind of like let it? I mean, how do you approach this?
Great question. It's like so many people in my industry, right? Like, we're the same. People ask us, hey, do you like document the crap out of like your kids' dance recitals or graduations? It's like, no, we shoot it on our iPhones, and if anything, it's probably not shot really well on your iPhones. Not to say that I want to separate my personal life from my business life, but I do, and I've learned, and I think there's a lot of people like me in my industry. So with my kids, I don't push them as hard. I've learned actually from some of the best of the best. They were pushed by some early on, but the ones that really had it just had it. Wow. Yeah. They, at some point, their parents kind of gave up, or they fired their parents, or they fired their coaches. They were just gonna run out there regardless of who was pushing them. So I've learned early on that, yes, it takes encouraging and providing the opportunities for the kids. But when it comes to them actually running with it, a lot of that's on them. And I'll give them all the opportunities in the world, and I'll support them, and I'll love them. But I won't push them to the point where it's like, there's a show called Friday Night Tykes, or everyone's heard of the term soccer moms and things like that. I haven't taken it there yet. Maybe I will, if I had more time with the kids. But I've learned that you either have it or you don't.
And I asked that question because I am curious about the Vietnamese culture, the diaspora in the US and abroad in Europe and Australia. If we need to put our focus on raising our kids a certain way, guiding them the way our previous generations guided us to become doctors and lawyers, and put that pressure on, but it probably doesn't work that way, right? Because in a free country like the US, where you are expected to kind of like nurture your child a certain way, you can't really push him in that same way. And I think you just answered that by saying, you got to really just create a safe environment for them to thrive in whatever they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, or we're messing it all up. It's like our parents, wow, what an amazing job they did making their way into a new country, under such difficult circumstances to raise our generation. I'm a first generation Vietnamese American, born right when we got here to America. And not like our parents consciously pushed my parents in a certain way, but just through hard work and survival, we saw it, right? We saw it. We said we had to make the best of the opportunity, and you hope to pass that along to our second generation as much as possible. But because we have more opportunities, um, you know, there's less of, I guess, a survival mode. I don't, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like we were in survival mode. I can't speak for you, Kenneth, and I think we chatted a little bit about it. But a lot of us Vietnamese American first generation have a similar
Yeah.
upbringing where it was survival. It was like, parents barely spoke English. You're one of few Asian kids at your school. You're just trying to make a name for yourself, which goes back to the why a lot of people got into those Asian gangs, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Find a place to fit in. Whereas this generation, much different, still got to push them. Still not that far off the boat, and don't want to forget that. And hopefully what we're doing is right, balancing between giving them opportunities, but at the same time pushing them.
Yeah. So how did you get your start in sports entertainment?
Yeah, so I was a failed athlete. So I thought I was gonna play football well into my college years, and hopefully beyond. That was my dream, right? I saw names like there was a wide receiver at UCLA named Brian Nguyen. I was like, wow, there's a Vietnamese guy at UCLA back in the late '90s doing great things. Played in the Rose Bowl. There was a Vietnamese wide receiver at the school that I went to, Cal State Northridge, named Duck Nguyen. So there was the idea I was going to play football, and I probably should have stuck with it, but then God, in a lot of ways, had different plans. Cal State Northridge, the team that I was planning to play for, got Title IX, right? They got rid of the football program for equal opportunities for females, and got rid of the football program probably in 99 or 2000. So I was forced to either, try to find another football program and continue my dreams, or figure something else out. And at that time, being in Northridge, you had access to the Dodgers, you had access to a thing called the Football Network before there was the NFL Network. And I did probably 2 or 3 internships. One with the Dodgers, one with the Football Network, one with the LA Arena Avengers football team, and then one was Fox Sports, which was just starting to get going in the late '90s in LA. Brand new building back over at Pico, yeah, near Culver City, kind of closer to the Santa Monica area, Universal City, no, Century City. Started interning at a program called Fox Sports. It was the highlight department, National Sports Report, coolest job ever, right? You come and you log highlights, and I think the first highlight, or one of the first highlights that I ever logged, was the women's soccer World Cup. This is the one where Brandy Chastain rips off her shirt after making a goal, and I'm like, hey, this is a pretty big deal. We should highlight this. And so I remember falling in love with sports, through my eyes as opposed to playing it, and getting to learn really quickly from a lot of great mentors, in the highlight department. And then I went over to a show called Fox Sports Rewind, Fox Sports Going Deep, and they were just getting going. And there was a lot of excitement in Los Angeles about where's the West Coast version of ESPN. And I was right there at the beginning of it. And I'd say by the time I graduated college, I got an offer to do a production assistant gig at a show called Beyond the Glory, which was amazing. Beyond the Glory is kind of like the behind the scenes, behind the music look at, some of the best athletes. And so, a company that I worked with did like 100 of them. And I got to cut my teeth with some of the best documentary storytellers and producers and editors and cameramen, and so that's how I got my start.
So let's take it back to when you get to Fox and you're doing the highlights, and this is the first job that you get, right? A lot of young people are starting out in the world, whether it's music or film or sports, and this whole idea of starting in the mailroom, starting in highlights, starting in positions where it's very nebulous and there's no form or shape to any of this.
Yeah.
it's a very important place in American society, in these industries, to start at these places, because you don't know where you're going to be thrust into next,
Right.
but you do a series of these and it builds your understanding of the industry that you're getting into. Did you know where you were headed, or did you have any inkling of the direction or what you wanted to do with your life at that point?
Yeah, I knew it had like one of like 3 or 4 options. You in that world at the time, and it's still the case in unscripted. You're either going to be a producer, an editor, a camera operator. Those are like the main 3 kind of jobs in that world of documentary storytelling at that time. From what I saw, the people that actually made decent amount of money, loved what they were doing, and actually were doing it for a while. Older mentors at the time. And I chose producing. I mean, editing was pretty special, but I knew, as important as the editor was, they weren't going to be out in the world as much. And I kind of fancied myself as a social individual and wanted to see the world. And I got to see from these mentors of mine, they got to travel the world. They got to meet the coolest people and see some of the amazing places in the world. And I got to work actually the Olympics early too. The people that were doing the Beyond the Glory show, some of them were working the Olympics. So they saw me early on, they saw my potential, and they were like, let's hit the road. And I mean, I got blessed pretty quickly in my career and started traveling pretty quickly. And just, again, got to see the coolest places in the world and the coolest stories and some of the best people to work with, and let alone document.
Wow, what a journey.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So I mean, not that I knew early on, but those were my options pretty quickly. Like that door opens up when you get into the documentary sports world or a documentary world, let alone a show that had 100 episodes, right? Ranging from Kobe Bryant to De La Hoya to Mike Tyson. I mean, the best of the best. And you're a sports guy, could not get any better, right?
Yeah. And
you're allowed to kind of watch and prep and get into these worlds. Could not have a better pool of content for me to dive into as someone who was into sports. Didn't know I was a storyteller at the time, but I knew I loved sports and was spoiled, absolutely spoiled from the get-go to dive into this world. And being a sports guy, whether it was horse racing or, the Iditarod or boxing, even though I didn't know much about the sport and I wasn't the biggest fan of that niche sport, learning about it was amazing.
Yeah.
And being able to be that in between, the people who knew everything about it and the masses was beautiful. And then the Olympics come along, and I got to do that for gymnastics and figure skating at the highest level with some of the best storytellers in the world for NBC Sports, and introduce people like, Nasty Liukin and Sean Johnson to the world. Like, our job was to take this obscure young athlete from China or Russia, even America, and introduce them to you in a short period of time. And what a blessing and privilege that was.
Now, throughout your years, you've been around a lot of elite athletes. What and who has left impressions in your mind, or has changed your life, or altered the way you looked at or perceived life?
The biggest one that I always give credit to, and it's a little unorthodox, was Mayweather. I remember day one meeting him in 2007, and it not going too well. I just remember him just like checking me, and he had already been with HBO probably for 8 years, kind of like one of their main fighters. But we were starting this new show called 24/7, HBO 24/7, and they kind of rolled the dice with someone like me. They had heard about me from the Olympics, and Floyd wasn't getting along with really any of the producers. And they kind of threw me in the deep end. And I met him, and he checked me a little bit and didn't give me full access.
When you say he checked you, what does that mean? What did he do?
I remember being in the gym, nervous as heck, with the camera crew. He wasn't there. It was his gym. He shows up. It's a big deal, right? This guy did not, I didn't know what a presence of a championship boxer was like back then. This boxing was new to me. And he comes in, my camera guy has lights up everywhere like it's a Nike commercial, and Floyd just starts ripping out all the lights. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Wait, he starts ripping out all the lights?
And he starts ripping out like like the cords that are plugged into the wall, the electricity.
Literally
Just plugging it. This is his gym. This is his gym. And I'm like, oh, he's not happy about this. And he's like, yo, man, this isn't your gym. And even though it wasn't really my fault, I'm following the lead of my director of photography at the time, I'm gonna take credit and take onus for it. And I remember like he even walked by me and like checked me with his shoulder, like just to show me my place. Like, this is not your domain. This is my domain. Like I'm number one here. You're not number one. I was like, okay, got it. And I just remember getting on the phone with HBO, going outside, going, hey, things aren't going too well. Things aren't going too well. Floyd's not happy, and they're laughing on the phone. It's like they know Floyd, right? And they do. They've been with him for years. They're like, hey, we knew this might be tough. Just hang in there. He kind of has been like this with everybody. Fingers crossed. Good luck. It was one of those things. Like, wow. Good luck. Brand new experimental show. Do what you do. They barely knew what I did, but they said, do what you do. And I just remember, documenting him and a lot of, successes and failures. And, you try things, some things don't work. You're shooting 24/7, literally. And then ultimately the technology allowed us to turn things around so quickly. This is the first time you can air a show of that caliber, documentary style. And have it concurrently, edit it and continue producing while watching with the talent. So I'm about to watch episode 1 with Floyd, and this guy, I don't know if he's going to kill me, even in this unscripted world, to be prepared. Even though I had come up through horse racing, gymnastics, figure skating, where you don't get too many tries, you got to be ready and you got to be cinematic and you got to be on your. So yeah, Floyd Mayweather taught me early on, that. We're there for them. They're not there for us, and to be ready at all times because, when he pulled out the lights and checked me, he reminded me that it's like, hey, you're documenting me. And I remember what he said was, he's like, this isn't fake. This is real life. Either you get it or you don't, and that's on you. And so I learned really quickly, and my team that I was with had to learn really quickly to adapt. Sometimes like we want that perfect shot or to have them walk through the door a second time, or, to get really cinematic with things. And what we learned from Floyd, it was like, you either get it or you don't. And if you get it, if you work really hard, if you prepare for it, if you plan it out, you kind of get, to certain places beforehand, you kind of map things out. It's going to be really authentic and it's going to be really good. And one of my great mentors and business partners, Todd Kretz, he always says he's a great editor, right? He's one of the best editors in the game. He always says the footage doesn't lie. And with Floyd Mayweather, the footage never lied. It was he was that authentic and that good. Then he actually gave us too much material to work with, to where 24/7 was only like a 22-25 minute show. And it was half him and half this other guy. And I just remember just praying, saying, one day, I'll get to document you more than, 20 minutes, even though we were with him for a month, if not longer. And I got that opportunity when he actually was heading to prison. So I was able to convince him and to let us document him. And I did a documentary called 30 Days in May, where, you documented the richest athlete on the planet going to prison, which was really cool.
It's amazing opportunity that you've been given. What do you think makes people call you up and say, hey, Jackson, like, I got this and I want you to do it?
I think, I'm not gonna lie, I leaned into my diverse background, me being going full circle to how we started this whole conversation. Me being a Vietnamese American, I think, has something to do with it. I think them knowing that I maybe came up through similar difficulties and obstacles, overcoming obstacles with a lot of athletes, especially, right? Most athletes have overcome something difficult. They fought to get out of a certain neighborhood. They fought to prove others wrong. And I think being Vietnamese American, just like you and I, and a lot of people listening to this, we've overcome something, or our parents have. And I think a lot of these athletes that I've had the privilege of working with saw that in me. And so, yeah, no, I think there's Floyd used to always say this: real recognize real, right? They know you've been through something. They know you have a story to tell, and they know you can relate. And in my world, I do a lot of social injustice and social justice programming as well. I've been blessed to be given that opportunity by BET. Being a minority that came up through difficult situations or understands what it's like coming up through difficult situations has been the big door opener for me.
Yeah. You came up when the UFC was starting, right?
Yeah.
You were there from the beginning. I mean, I think you had it sounds like an 11-year contract or something with them.
Well, I mean, that wasn't a kind of permalance in some ways they call it, but actually, so there was the beginning of the UFC, which was back in the early 90s, right? That was formed, and that's when you remember watching Royce Gracie and the different martial arts facing each other. And sometimes, I remember the first UFC, Royce Gracie had like 3 or 4 fights or something like that. So there was that version of the UFC, and then later the next era of the UFC was probably in the early 2000s when Dana White and the Fertitta brothers took over.
Okay, that's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
So what is it in the first iteration of the UFC versus the second iteration of Dana White? And is there storytelling mechanisms that sort of made the second iteration of the UFC pop?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. You were part of it all, I think, in the second iteration. What is it in the storytelling or in the branding? What is it that made it go from basically a dead business to a multi-billion-dollar business today?
Yeah, not going to take credit for any of that at first. And I'll tell you what happened, because it was actually the last Beyond the Glory episode that we did was on the UFC. This is 2005 or 2006. And it was an amazing story that a friend of mine produced. And we learned a lot about the UFC. And a lot of it goes back to the show The Ultimate Fighter. So basically, Dana White had convinced his dear friends, the Fertitta brothers, to invest in this company and buy it. And they bought it. And then they lost a ton of money. And they were about to lose all the money. And then Dana convinced the Fertitta brothers to invest even more, which is in the tune of like 40 or 50 plus $1 million more. And I think they were down to their last dime again. And then they created The Ultimate Fighter, which was a time buy on Spike TV. They actually had to pay to air this thing. And that's when it caught fire. And then Stephen Bonner, rest in peace, and Forrest Griffin fought. And I think that was the big fight that ignited the popularity of the UFC. And then that's when I came in. So I got lucky enough after the 24/7 series for HBO to where the UFC was paying attention and was like, hey, we got to do something like this. And so I worked closely with them for a show called UFC Countdown. And then we did a first couple UFC prime times. Guy named Jason Hare, who actually worked on 24/7, actually worked with us to create UFC Primetime with BJ Penn and George St. Pierre. And then we started doing kind of like the 24/7 behind the scenes look at the UFC fighters getting ready for a big fight. And then I probably worked for the UFC with the UFC between 2008 and, I still work with the UFC, So got to meet everyone from Liddell Ortiz to Anderson Silva, spent several months in Hawaii with BJ Penn. It was just really cool. I would say like probably the most formative years of the UFC. I got to kind of have a first row seat at it.
Yeah. What do you think was the magic, between the first iteration and the second iteration? What made it blow up?
Well, they capitalized off of the technology in television, right? Well, The Ultimate Fighter, can't take anything away from that. Is it still on? It might still be on. So the Ultimate Fighter had a lot to do with it. And what I mean by the technology is like, back in the day, you'd have to like to get really cinematic stuff, you would film it, you'd take it to telecine, you'd get it back a week later, you'd get it into the edit in a different format and edit it. And it was quite the process of getting something really cinematic out to the masses, and I learned that through working with people at the Olympics. And then all of a sudden, Panasonic came along and introduced us to this camera called Vericam. And it allowed us to, like, I remember being at, in the edit bay in Athens for the 2004 Olympics, and Panasonic coming in with this camera in this converter box. And they showed us that we could convert this media into high speed, which is slow motion, and it would just be gorgeous. And we were looking at it real time, turning around this footage within minutes. And we knew at that point, oh, this is going to change the game, right? And that's actually the technology that we use for 24/7, which allowed for it to be as beautiful and cinematic as it was, and quickly turn that around. And so I think that, coupled with iconic athletes, right? UFC jumped in at the right time. And one of my mentors, David Michaels, the great David Michaels, he's one of the best directors in sports history. He taught me every sport lives and dies off iconic athletes. And in a lot of ways, every sport has been dying for decades. Boxing, they always say boxing's dying, been dying for hundreds of years. UFC, gymnastics, figure skating, horse racing, you name it, until an iconic athlete comes out, right? And until a Mayweather comes out, Pacquiao comes out, Michelle Kwan, like, tough time for some of these sports where there aren't these big names. Right. Conor McGregor, right? UFC. So you need an iconic athlete, and you need to capitalize off of it at the right time with the technology that's given to you. Right now, there's so much great technology. Kids could turn around a show in minutes. So it really comes down to what sport it is, who are the iconic athletes, and are the sports services and TV companies jumping on them, and they do now. Everyone has their own version of 24/7 these days, and now there might be too much content out there.
Yeah, this is all very metaphorical for life almost. It's an analogy, sort of like when I think about what you're saying. It's like, these industries such as music or film in Vietnam, or the Vietnamese diaspora. You need to have the driver, the iconic athlete, that drives that industry into the stratosphere, right? You have to have that unique actor or that unique singer from Vietnam or Vietnamese diaspora, that shining star. So it's almost like we can't even calculate when this is going to happen.
You can't. You just got to kind of feel it, and in terms of knowing. Is it, you look what happened with Korean content over the past 5-10 years. I mean, BTS has something to do with it, right? And those, even though I should know their names, right? The directors that won the Oscars for Parasite and these amazing filmmakers, it's like they have had a hell of a run, and they've capitalized off of that run. What's that new show on Netflix?
Squid Games.
Good games, right?
Yep.
So the Korea, what's happening with the Korean content makers is a great example, capitalizing off of the talent that is capturing the world's attention.
Yeah, and they've been at it for over 30 years. Their government, their people, everything infrastructurally has been aimed at getting this right, and so. They're breeding the athletes, or they're breeding the talent to get camera ready. So when the time comes, they're all ready for it.
Oh yeah. I just thought about it. It's like, remember Gangnam Style?
Yeah.
Yeah. 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like who knew it was actually the foundation for things like BTS,
Who would have known? That's some crazy shit. Because when you looked at it, it was like such a silly video. You're like, this is out of control. This is like, it's almost cringy, but you want to keep looking at it. But you're right. It laid the foundation for us to kind of like, it's wide open. Like, oh, come and sit with us to sort of enjoy this kind of quirkiness, but we're going to bring you much more soon. We had no idea.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, the Oscar run this past year with Everything Everywhere. And I'm saying
Mhm.
it all wrong, but I think you
I
know
know
what
I
I
get
mean.
it all wrong too.
I get it wrong.
I
But
never get it
like
right.
I said, I mean, Michelle Yeoh and them, they've been at it for 30 plus years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's hard work, while we're all sleeping, they're working. And the same thing goes with like the Vietnamese, media, right? Like you got to capitalize it where you can, and that's what you're doing an amazing job. Johnny's doing an amazing job, and God bless you guys for doing this. And hopefully, what you guys are doing is laying the foundation for the Vietnamese to have a run. Hopefully, not too far in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and even if it's far in the future, like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, this is a beautiful thing to even witness from the ground floor. You're
Yeah.
getting into feature films, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny when I say you're getting into it, but I know that you've been into it for like at least a decade, but it takes time to develop and tell me about that journey.
Yeah, no. So we have one film that's in edit right now, and it's directed by Lee Daniels, produced by Tucker Tooley. I mean, Glenn Close is in it. Monique's in it. You know, escapes my mind right now.
Wait. You just said something. So wait, Lee Daniels directed and Monique is in it. I thought they had some feud, right?
Yeah, yeah. That feud is ended. Yeah. Hopefully with this film. Hopefully with this film. But yeah, no, it's a movie that I came across on the unscripted side. We were going to make a documentary out of it. It's a real life demon possession. A family went through some horrible situations in Gary, Indiana, and a mother lost her children to the government, and then there were documentation of one of her kids walking up the wall at the hospital's office. And yeah, you Google it, you might find it hard to sleep tonight. It's
Wait. How did you get a hold of this project and what was your position in this project?
Yeah, well, a friend of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, my cousin's having issues with his kids. Like it's all over the news, and the government took the kids from their mother." And he's like, "Just Google it. Latoya Ammons. Latoya Ammons, Ammons. Let me know if you're interested." I'm like, "What do you want me to tell a documentary? You want me to get the news outlets involved?" He's like, he didn't know what to do, so he reached out to me. And I looked into it, and me and my partner were like, "Wow, what a story!" I mean, demonic possession. On one end, we were like, "Do you stay the heck away from this completely?" Which my wife would have preferred at the time, because she's very spiritual and was very spiritual, and I've become very spiritual since then. But my partner and I were like, "All right, well, let's make a movie. Let's at the very least do a documentary." And I think in the process of trying to acquire the rights to get the documentary, we also got the movie. There was many studios that were actually trying to get the rights to this thing. It was a pretty hot property in 2011, 2012. And so
When you say
I,
people were trying to acquire the rights to it from who, by who, like who owned
yeah.
quote
Well,
unquote
I mean,
story
the
rights?
family, the mother and the family owned the rights. It's like it was like a modern day. What was that movie?
Exorcist.
Yeah, Exorcist. There's another series. There was another franchise, not The Exorcist. Why am I having a tough time thinking about it in the Northeast in Connecticut? But it was a modern day, you know, Exorcist slash horror story, and the mom trusted me. The mom who was being reached out to by big studios kind of didn't like what she was hearing, didn't trust them, and for some reason trusted me. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, right? Like she thought that she could trust her project in my hands, and whether it become a documentary or a feature film, I would help get it there in the long run. And so I embarked on a journey that changed my entire life. Changed my faith, changed the course of my family's history. It changed me in so many ways for the positive. And even if the movie was never going to get made, it changed my life. Just learning about it and diving into it and understanding what they went through, or trying to understand what they went through, and working with the studios. And one of the studios went under, only for us to like work really hard to get it extracted from one studio and move it to another studio. I mean, just the Hollywood game, right? And here we are, 10 years later, almost 9, 10 years later, and it's still being produced and worked on. And hopefully it releases next April on Netflix. It's the working title is called The Deliverance.
So it's all in the can. Like you guys are done shooting it.
It's done shooting. They might do additional pickups, but in the most part, it's all in the can. And now it's kind of going through the edit process. And Lee Daniels is doing his thing. We fought really hard to keep Lee Daniels on the project. Really thought he was the right person to be a producer director on it when his time was available. And when he made himself available after Billie Holiday to work on this one, I think he's worked on a Sammy Davis Jr. as well, a project for Hulu. We were blessed to have him jump onto this.
Now, when you say it changed your life, you didn't believe in this spiritual realm before.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I believe, but I didn't really dip my toe in too much. I grew up as a Buddhist, traditional Buddhist, raised as a Buddhist. My grandmother's a monk. My dad's pretty hardcore Buddhist. But my mom, allowed me to kind of explore, as I grew up. But I wasn't really into choosing a certain lane, and my wife, who's been Christian, she was born and raised Catholic, but she got saved as a Christian probably in her early 20s, was always was always there for me when I needed her, but understood that I struggled with my faith and struggled with spirituality and religion. And so this movie, it's crazy because you go after a project to make money off of the devil in so many ways, right?
yeah.
Only to walk away finding God, in the process. And I think that's my testimony, right? My testimony is that, I was looking to make money off of a movie, or at least, get a story out there, and in the process, through the research, through my family getting behind me, because my wife was the type of person who was like, listen, you can't kick the hornet's nest. You can't jump into demonic possession, not do the research, and come home with 2 young kids, And so I have this funny story that I say where my wife literally for months, definitely weeks, would not let me into the house unless I read certain passages from the Bible.
Holy shit.
Yeah. She'd watch me from the window because she knew I was talking to the family, talking to exorcists, talking to people that we needed to kind of work with to produce this movie. And she's like, you can't just bring this stuff home, and she would have, pastors praying for me and Bible studies and this. And I was the a-hole, on the couch, kind of trying to avoid all of it, only to be the kind of succumb to it. And in a lot of ways, that's how I ended up getting the property, because when I met with LaToya and her spiritual advisor, so many of these things that my wife was instilling in me through these passages in the Bible, through these pastors, through these Bible studies, were now coming out of me. Now, as a researcher, it was all coming in, and all of a sudden it was coming out of me to LaToya, to these people, to these studios. And next thing you know, you start living it. And for me as a documentarian, as a producer, like, I love researching everything about a person. Like if I were to do a documentary on you, Kenneth, I probably would know everything about you. But when I talk to you and I put you on camera, not like you act like you know nothing, but you pull it out of you, you know? And so I did that with this project. And in the process, I became a Christian. In the process, I became a Christian. My faith has grown, and it's been a big part of my family life. And in my work life in a lot of ways, I do a true crime show called American Gangster for BET. And a lot of times, these shows, you learn from these people, these amazing people, especially athletes as well, outside of true crime. Their faith is so strong.
Yeah.
Like whether it's to get to the pinnacle of sports or whether it's to get out of a bad situation. You learn about faith, and it's hard to understand and explain that unless you live through it yourself. And so I think as a storyteller, I've been blessed by kind of going through it myself, and with my family.
But what is it about that journey? What did you see that made you, you know what I mean? I'm curious about, because I'm a man of a different type of faith. I'm agnostic. I
Yeah.
believe there's got to be something out there, right? Something that's intelligently has designed this place.
Yeah.
But I don't know what kind of controls and what kind of influence it really has over us. And I don't know. I just haven't spent the time the way you do. But whenever I meet people who are my age,
Yeah.
and who didn't grow up with the spiritual background that I grew up heavy Catholic,
Yeah.
and so all of that turns me off. And I'm learning to absolve it. I'm learning to relinquish that sort of control over the way I see the world. I'm trying to be more open minded.
Right.
But when I run across people like you, it makes me question what exactly happened that you saw with your feelings that rocked your world to change the trajectory of your spiritual life.
For me, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. It's more of a collection, a collective of things that happened over the past decade, from little to big to small to work to personal, and what I've learned, especially with the young kids, my kids are now 12 and 9, but, over the past decade, obviously, from 0 to where they are now, that foundation, when things are tough, having that community with my own family, let alone a real community, whether it's a school they go to, or whether it's a church they go to, or whether it's their friends, I've learned the importance of community. I've learned the importance of community through my own experiences. I've learned the importance of community through sports and documenting these athletes. It takes a village to raise an individual, whether it takes a community to rescue somebody. I had a lot of negative things to say about, religion for years. And, at my weak points, I can still find those things to say bad about them. But what I have learned is that community is so important. And is that less Christianity and more about community? Maybe. But I think there's something to be said about having that common ground together as a community to lean on when times are tough. Times are always tough, right? Like whether it's COVID, whether you've lost a loved one, whether you're going through financial issues, you name it. Times are tough. And when you have that community, let alone with your family, when you get to pray together through tough times, and them understanding that you're not always going to be perfect, and to have someone above me to lean on was the best gift that I could ever learn to provide them. And so I think without one specific thing happening, it was a lot of things. And I don't want to kind of go into the laundry list of problems that we all have as individuals. But I learned through the process that sense of comfort and community is the greatest gift that I've been given, because I travel a lot for work. I travel a ton for work. I'm always around the world. I didn't think about that before I had kids, but now I still do that. And, I think a lot of times, especially when during my weak moments, who's taking care of my kids when I'm not there? Who can take care of my kids when I'm not there? Yes, my wife is there, but sometimes she's not there. They're at school or things that happen. And you watch the news and there's horrible things that happen all the time. And I'd love to believe that there's something or someone watching over my children when I'm not there. And it brings me great comfort, that's made me a believer. That's one of the many things that's helped make me a believer.
Now, can I ask you this? The
Sure.
framework of Christianity and demonic existence, right? Because if we come from a Muslim background or Buddhist background, some Eastern tradition, and we see things in its own kind of, we experience things in its own sphere, right?
Right.
If we're experiencing demonic possession in Vietnam, it's under a different sort of like, it's under a different structure. We perceive things differently. So because we're in America and we're under the Christian sort of lens that we see demonic trying to exorcise demons, and being a Buddhist all of your life, did any of this sort of like structural, you know what I'm saying? I'm getting at this sort of like the way
I think I get you, because I'll give you an example.
The lens of how we're seeing it is like depending on where we come from a spiritual religious background, right? So how does that, how did it come?
Oh yeah. It jacked me up. It still jacks me up. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, my mom, attends this spiritual church. She's still Buddhist, and Orange County, and they go to these things. And I went with my wife once, who's Catholic Christian most of her life, and we went, and they had they celebrate Tet, right? And we're all there, and there's a god of money. There's someone who gets possessed in the crowd and starts walking around and handing off money. And growing up, I remember seeing that and going, "Oh, it's normal. It's Vietnamese, that's a thing." Seeing it from my wife's lens was comical at first, but then obviously you think about it. Like, my wife was watching, going, "What is this?" "Oh, honey, yeah, the individual got possessed by someone called the god of money, and they're passing around." She's like, "What do you mean he got possessed, or she got possessed?" And I started seeing it from her lens of like, is that good? Is like, well, in our Vietnamese culture, or at least what we're celebrating, yeah, it's good. He'll snap out of it. It could be all fake, but and then I started understanding it from not only her lens, but from like the Christian lens, and going, is it good to lose control to a spirit? And if that's real, well, shit, how many of them are there? And are there bad ones? Let alone the good guy that's giving out money, and is that good? And so you start thinking about those things, and it's a very cultural, right, Kenneth? Like, we grow up in this, and it's very normal, and being possessed or being embodied by other spirits was kind of a normal thing in our tradition. If anything, we encouraged it. If anything, we prayed for it. We got the incense, we got on our knees, and we kind of welcomed it, and we fed our spirits. I'm calling them demons. We fed our ancestors. As I've grown to look at it better through the lens, at least my family, and not to say this is right or wrong. I'm talking about like my current family versus the family I was raised in. This was the one that I'm with right now. What I'm practicing now, not to say it's healthier, but I could understand it more, and at least the community around me can understand it more and encourage it and get behind it. When with Buddhism and Vietnamese Buddhism, for me, there were small pockets of communities. You had to kind of go find them, and every one of them were different. Not to say that Christianity is any different, because Christianity has Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and a lot of different obviously religions at the same time, denominations, and Buddhism as well. But it was so much harder as a kid being a Buddhist, figuring out, well, are those Korean Buddhists the same as us? Are those Chinese Buddhists the same as us? Are the Laotians? And the parents had a tough time explaining it to me. And we would do these chants. I don't know if you still practice Buddhism, but a lot of chanting. Didn't understand what we were saying, And definitely, now that looking back at it, it definitely spooks me out to see people get possessed, regardless if it's the god of money giving me money or someone else.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, I think, a long way of answering your question. Yes, it's very cultural, but at the end of the day, it comes down to, what are you most comfortable with your family? Like, if you are in a community that can explain to you and your kids the importance of this faith, and they rally behind you when times are tough, and understand how to raise your kids when Kenneth isn't there, and you trust the way they raise your kids or what they're saying to your kids, then that's a blessing. So I'm not the type to want to choose whether Christianity is better than Buddhism or any other religion, but I've learned in my surroundings and kind of what I've been brought up in, the stories that I've been telling, that there's this common ground that's really opened a lot of doors for me and my family, and that I want to keep watering, and encouraging and seeing the growth. I mean, there's like 90% of athletes, if not more, are Christian. Not to say that that's the right way to go.
Right.
A lot of these stories that I tell, and when faith is involved, there's Christian tones. I mean, shit. There's that joke, right? I forgot what comedian said it. It's 2023, right? 2023 since when? Anybody in the world could answer that question, right? Even if you're an atheist or an agnostic. So I think even if you're in the depths of the jungle, in Southeast Asia, you're going to ask yourself at one point what year it is, and maybe ask that question of why. Why does it all go back to the birth of Jesus or the death of Jesus? So that's my testimony. It's not the right answer, and hopefully, or I don't think it's a wrong answer either, but it's kind of how I came to it, and how I find value in it with my family and my storytelling.
Yeah, it's fair game. And I think that faith has a lot to do with excelling, whether it's sports or politics or, the West has this really ingrained sense of, I mean, you talk about manifest destiny, and probably not a good word to use in this context, but the belief in this, invisible hand and faith really drives the narrative that we have this infrastructure in our mind to keep pushing forward, because there's this unseen, divinity.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like when you run out of answers, I've learned to lean on faith and hope. I mean, I don't know if you've gone through. Hopefully, you don't have to go through difficulties that I've seen and heard others go through. But sometimes you don't have the answers. Sometimes you don't have the answers when you're dealing with a loved one, a parent, going through difficult times. And I love the idea that there's a community of people with me that are supporting me, that are going to be there for me, regardless of what happens. And I think Buddhism is the same. I just, for some reason, that lane kept getting thinner and thinner. And that probably has a lot to do with me not going down that path.
Right.
I mean, I could have. My grandma was a monk. What I mean? So that was God's plan. And I wonder. It's funny that you say that, because I wonder, in the East, do they not dive into it as much? You would think they do, because there's so many monks, and religion is a big deal. I know in Asia,
but I don't think the Eastern philosophies are thinking forward, right? It's not thinking time-wise what's in advance, the way we in the West think of manifest destiny, like go get the future, go approach the future. I think with Buddhist philosophy, it's more dealing with suffering, with the present moment. It's always talking about the present moment. And I think with Western philosophy, Western ideals, and Christianity talks more about structuring your life so you can live something that moves the train forward. I think it's very different. I'm thinking in real time right now. I could be way off. People could probably be debating. I'd love to hear this debate.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's special. I think you're right, and I think that's something that makes us special, right? In some ways, with being from the East, living in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And appreciating both those worlds, right?
Yeah. Then it's both important. Now, with the Deliverance, when do you think that's coming out?
So I'm told it's coming out April of 2023. So
wait, that's right now, April 2023.
April 2024. Yeah, a year from
April 2020, like a year from now.
Years already. Sorry. Yeah, April 2024. I mean, the scripted game, in my experience, wow, it takes a while.
Yeah.
And I'm told from my producing partner Tucker Tooley that this was a quick one. He also did The Fighter and a couple other amazing movies. He's done over 50 plus, if not 100 movies, and it sounds like it takes time. And in my experience, it does. And I'm definitely more of an unscripted guy, just because I like to move a little quicker. But if one of my properties that I work on or get the privilege to work on becomes a scripted property, I think that's where my lane is, right? Like I'm all about scripted properties that come from a foundation of reality.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the Deliverance is all in the can and it's just being edited and, you know, you need pickups and, you know, but it's basically going to happen. It's basically going to see the light of day at this point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I hope. I mean, Netflix spent like $75+ million on it.
It's a
So
big deal.
it's a pretty big deal, you know, especially
Yeah.
in the horror market, right? Where, you know, there's these movies that the Blumhouse movies that, you know, are a million to 10 million to 20 million maybe, that do extremely well.
Yeah.
Here you got a $75+ million movie. Quite the investment from Netflix to believe in the project, to believe in Lee Daniels, believe in the cast. So hopefully it does what we all intended it to do, right? The goal when I spoke to LaToya Ammons nearly 10 years ago was to get her story out to the masses. And I think we're in the process of doing that. You know, there's not very few people in the world that don't know what Netflix is.
Yeah. But if you look at the formula, right? You talk about Blumhouse, $10 million, $20 million formula of, you know, horror films that make a lot of money back.
Right.
This is not that, if you think about it, right? Because they put 75 million, which is, you know, it's exponentially more than the 20 million. It's, you know, 3 times, 4 times more than the average horror. So, and, you know, you have big names like Lee Daniels, Monique, and so it's different. So there's a different, in my bones, I'm feeling like there's a different messaging with this story.
It really is. It's God bless Netflix, because we were talking about 10, 20 million for years.
Yeah.
And even with Lee Daniels attached, I think he pushed for it to kind of have more relevance, more star power, which is how he was able to get the tune of 75 million. But yeah, I mean, great point, Kenneth. Like I think they're all seeing, and hopefully we all see something different with this project. I mean, you know, Lee has this amazing story where he says Oprah kind of begged him not to do it. You know,
Why?
because I think this is Lee's first horror film, right? For faith-based in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
right? And I think you know, Lee said Oprah begged him not to do it because you know, I don't know why, but it was maybe something like, you know, be careful what you jump into, be careful of kicking the hornet's nest, basically, right? Yeah. And he kind of disregarded her advice and dove in headfirst. And a lot of the filmmakers that we surrounded ourselves with the producers, were really doing this for the first time, you know. And so I think that's the exciting part. We're not your traditional horror filmmakers. If anything, you got documentarians, you got amazing storytellers. Lee's done amazing work in this lane, you know, with movies like Precious and Monsters Ball, which he produced as well. And so I think we're seeing it as something different than just a horror film. You know, we're seeing it as something that hopefully changes people's lives when they watch it. You know, and so that was the goal. And so I think Netflix getting behind it with at the tune of 75+ million is part of that as well. So we're all hoping it's something special and different beyond just your typical horror film.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I hope, you know, April 2024 is another year from here. Hopefully we'll get you back on in March and, you know, we'll talk about the next phase and the release of it. Just like a Tourist Guide to Love is coming out April 21st. It's shot entirely in Vietnam, and, you know, it has a Vietnamese male lead, and it's Netflix. So, you know, we have all the filmmakers and Rachel Lee Cook coming on, and the screenwriter was Vietnamese, and the lead actor was Vietnamese, have all come onto the podcast. So hopefully when the time comes for the Deliverance to come out, you know, we'll have you back on and back in March 2024 or something like that.
Oh man, that'd be amazing. Can't promise I'll get Lee Daniels and Glenn Close on though.
that would be great. Even if it's just you to talk about, you know, from today till then, we got like 11 months, and I would love to hear what has happened, you know, leading from, you know, 2023 April to April 2024, and what has happened and transformed the storyline or whatever. You know, I would love to hear about it.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, Kenneth. And thank you so much for putting this together and all the amazing work that you're doing to spread the word of us, you know, in this industry. And And you're doing this, you're doing beyond this industry. You're just doing, people within the Vietnamese American community that are just doing amazing things. So
Yeah, shout out to Johnny over at VidQ Media for the introduction. Thank you so much, Johnny.
thanks, Johnny. God bless you for that. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's really my honor, a privilege to be able to serve in this way.
No, of course. Can't have enough of it, man. Thanks, Kenneth.
Thanks again, Jackson. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, appreciate it, brother. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcasts.